Welcome back to the Evidence-Based Pilates podcast. And I have an incredible guest on today. We have Reed Flanagan, which I hope I said your last name correctly. But if not, don't worry, because you get to correct me. With that, for the listeners who are not familiar with you and your work, Reed, would you mind introducing yourself and telling us your story?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. Again, yep, my name is Reed Flanagan. You got the last name right. And my story as far as Pilates and fitness goes back really all the way to a sixth grade family report on our history. And I remember going to my mom and asking her about our family's background, and going to my dad and asking him. And when I asked my dad, he told me no one in 9 generations had lived past the age of 45. And I took that to heart at even that age of, oh, that's not a very long life. So that year I asked for a Bowflex for a Christmas present. And that's when I started working out and started falling in love with fitness. Fast forward, I went to college. Studied in things that weren't fitness, didn't really love it. So I was just kind of meandering my way through college and decided to get trained as a personal trainer. And then when I moved back home one summer, I started working out at a gym and got a job there as a personal trainer. And that's kind of where it all started. And that was in 2012 that I started there. Flash forward to 2015. I started working at a private resort in my hometown, and I again was teaching personal training. I'd also gotten my yoga certification by then, and there was a master Pilates instructor there at the resort. She was the only Pilates instructor there, and she would come take my classes. And she really enjoyed the classes and the way I taught. And she approached me and said, "Hey, I teach 7 days a week. I travel an hour and a half to get here one way. I would love some free time to spend with my family. If I train you, will you start teaching Pilates on the weekend for me?" So that's kind of how I got into teaching Pilates. Was there. She was a Balanced Body master instructor, and that's who I'm trained through, is Balanced Body. And then I taught there for 2 years. And then 2017, I opened my very first studio, which was not named Atlantis Fitness and Pilates. I ended up rebranding. And from there, had my own studio, ran it for almost 8 years. And then in 2023, when I relocated to California, I shut my studio down and decided to go fully virtual. And here I am now.
There you go. What a well-rounded background. I'm at the age where I have to write stuff down or else I forget them. So I don't know what age that started, but I blame my mother. And so personal training, yoga, and Pilates. And what a selfish thing for that instructor to not want to work 7 days a week and give you weekends.
Exactly.
Isn't that's like the stuff we don't tell Pilates instructors when they sign up? You might work 7 days a week to make it.
Yes.
Or no one would sign up for training. But with that, that's kind of really the heart of our conversation. Is I can certainly relate to parts of your background of really studying movement outside of Pilates and the influence that has over Pilates. And I wanted to have you on because I've certainly been that listener who was curious about more than Pilates, but I didn't really know where to go, where to find inspiration and things of that nature. And I'm really curious with you, like, what does Pilates mean to you?
So Pilates, when I think Pilates for outside of myself and what I do, I think of what most people think of when they think of Pilates. They think of Pilates mat, or like a more classical style Pilates reformer, learning the classical repertoire, learning the Pilates principles, and all of that, which is all great. It's something that, as we go on and talk a little bit more about my training and how differentiated away from that, I will still always tell people, if you are going to teach reformer at all or teach any kind of mat Pilates at all, go learn your foundation first. I did that. I stuck with it for a long while before I started branching away. Now, to me, when I have people come to me, and now, and to go back again, 2015 was kind of a different time for Pilates. It
Yeah.
seemed, especially where I was, it was still very unknown. No one really even knew what mat Pilates was. So a lot of people didn't know what it was they were coming into. And in that, I got to train them, to teach them Pilates. But, and this is where sometimes people will disagree or get their feelings hurt. A lot of people that come to Pilates, and even today, people that are still kind of new to it, don't necessarily want to learn Pilates. They don't want to learn the Pilates principles. They don't want to necessarily learn the foundation. A lot of students that come into class, and it's why I've started to change how I teach, they come in because they want a good workout. They're excited about the new machine. Um, Talking about the reformer, or if you're in a place that has Cadillac and all the other pieces of equipment, all that. And so that's where I really started to change my teaching style, to reference my yoga training, which was really, really good. They always said to teach to who's in front of you. Don't teach over their head. Don't come at it as a, I'm superior because I have all this knowledge. Let me show off my knowledge to you and brag, blah, 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 blah. They said, teach to who's in front of you. Don't, say, oh, we're going to train your quadratus lumborum, blah, 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 blah. Like, speak to the muscles in the way that they know, so that you're encouraging them. That doesn't mean to not sprinkle in the knowledge as we're going about it. And so that's kind of, to me, what Pilates is now. Is Pilates to me is teaching clients who want to come learn Pilates. But for the most part, a lot of people I see, they want a good workout utilizing the reformer. So I look at the reformer as a tool for exercise, not just Pilates.
Very well said. And there's like 6 episodes worth of stuff in there, but I'll try to stay focused. So with that, like some things that stick out to me is that it sounds like it's like your approach to Pilates is about the client rather than about what you've determined the client needs or should learn.
Yeah.
And things of that nature. I've definitely been through that, especially as we're all passionate about movement, or more likely to be passionate about Pilates, and we want to share a passion, but it's a skill to step outside of yourself and give the client what they need. And sometimes they don't care about things that we really care about, like who Joe and Clara Pilates was. And that's no disrespect, but if I were taking a tap dancing class or yoga class, I really could care less about the origins of it, because I'm just trying to get away from my emails. I just want to move, right? So I think it's really great that you identify that. And then something that you mentioned about was like not really cueing a lot of detail, and I think that's a little sidestep that I want to tap into. Is that you mentioned like not really cueing like the quadratus lumborum and things like that, and these like educational pieces that we try to feed our clients. And what's your interpretation on cueing, like the depth of cueing in detail that you find helpful for a client?
Again, it's very much to look at what's in front of you. If a client is doing something extremely dangerous, by all means, stop them or whatever. But you want them to be curious and to kind of figure it out for themselves. We have this desire, I feel like, and I think it's just a human desire of, I possess this knowledge and I want to essentially force it on you. And I think that's a wrong way to approach it. Again, we want them to experience it. So a lot of the ways that I like to teach and the way that I cue in class is, if anything, I will cue them how to do something wrong first, like completely wrong. Like, let's lift the shoulder up by our ear and all this kind of stuff. And then I'll have them do it. Okay, now with the shoulder down away from the ear. Can you feel that as we're doing this different thing? And so I want them to feel it and understand it in their body. That way, when I cue it in the future, there's a like physical memory of what I'm asking.
That's awesome. Yeah. And that's a great way to go about it, in a way that translates to the individual. And I think a big part of our profession is the art of communication.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience, the way I would communicate to a physical therapist is on my computer, or not my computer. I'm on a computer now on the reformer.
Yeah.
Would be very different than like if you've ever taught an engineer. They're my favorite because they want to know like how the springs are, like they want to know about the mechanisms.
Yep.
That's a nerdy session, whereas the regular people meaning others, are a little bit different. Just
Yeah.
bring your shoulders up
And to
then
kind of
Yeah.
like to go back to something else. So part of my background as well, in between college and getting certified as a personal trainer, is I went through EMS school. And one of the things we learned is essentially there's three levels of medical talk. We had one that we talked to the everyday pedestrian. We
Mhm.
had a shorthand that we used between EMS individuals ourselves. Then we had one that when we were talking about a patient to a doctor that we used there. And that's kind of how I view, again, a lot of what we do as teaching is you have to understand where that person's at to speak to them so that they get it. That way, again, we're not showing off just to show off. We're not using big words or using crazy ideas if it's not going to land for a person. So
Yeah, communication's only as good as it's received.
mhm.
Um, but for those who are unfamiliar with the acronym EMS, could you define that?
So emergency medical services, so like EMT essentially, or a paramedic. In Georgia, we had three different levels. So I was a intermediate EMT, is where I went through in my schooling.
There you go. So you didn't have to worry about getting that the oh my gosh, the CPR certification. I
Yep.
told you my brain is something today.
Yep. Yep.
You already knew how to do CPR. You're so good. That's awesome. But a big part of what I'd like to discuss today is really strength based
Hmm.
reformer, right? That's something that's really inspired me with your work.
Yeah.
And for the listener, could you give us your insights on like the difference between like strength, endurance, hypertrophy, cardio, like these different subsets of fitness?
Yeah. So, a lot of times when we talk about like strength or power, we're talking about, essentially our body's ability to utilize force against an object. And for pure like strength and power, we're not talking many reps. I'd say 6 reps kind of thing or less that we're really focused on there. For endurance, a lot of people, think of endurance as, oh, like a marathoner, I'm going to go run. And yes, that is endurance. But again, endurance to me is really what a lot of traditional Pilates kind of is it can be, like a 10 to 15 rep range. It's not very hard. And it's not very hard, I should say, as far as like, again, you're going to be exhausted, not be able to do it again, but it is challenging. I don't want to misstep on anyone there. And then for hypertrophy, we're again talking about taking a rep range, and there's lots of debate back and forth. You actually posted a beautiful thing, from, I forget what the guy's name was that you posted to your Instagram story the other week. But he was talking about rep ranges for hypertrophy that could be anywhere between 5 to 30 reps, and they really can. But the key of it was you have to be taking it essentially to its limit. You have to be almost going to failure on your sets, in those. And then what was the last one? Was it cardio?
Yeah, sorry, I threw like 7 questions at you.
Yeah.
Yeah, strength specifically, and then cardio as well.
And again, cardio, I always tell people, cardio is to work your heart, it's to work your cardiovascular system. At the end of the day, that's the most simple version of it. I feel like we can say you can turn just about anything into cardio if you're doing enough reps of it. So cardio and endurance are similar. I won't say that they're the same, but to me, they can be a very similar concept to use.
Yeah, if someone is like maxed out at their cardiovascular capacity, like what are like signs that you see in a person? Like you know how you look at someone and you're like, "Oh, cardio for sure."
Yeah.
Like what kind of signs and symptoms do they have?
Again, you'll start seeing flushness in the face. You'll see again a little sheen on them. You'll see again some labored breathing, or difficulty breathing, as they're going through it. And again, just they essentially they look gassed. They look like they've given it all, or ready to kind of fall over a lot of times, depending on how hard the cardio is for them. But hopefully they're working at a decent pace.
Yeah, make them faint and then they've done their cardio. Just yeah, they're like it's breathing, right? It's like breathing your heart's up. And then when I think of endurance, like a really simple way, just I think it's really useful as a listener to hear things said, like the same thing said like 7 ways, and then one
Absolutely.
way sticks with you.
Yep.
That's the one. When I think of endurance, I think of fire. I think it burns.
Yep.
Everything burns. Endurance.
Everything burns. Again, think a perfect example was like this morning. I was having them do lunges this morning. We did quite a few. We were doing up to 20 reps of lunges, and they were near those last few. They were like, my thighs are burning. So that's why I say a lot of times I feel like some of what we do in Pilates hits more of that endurance aspect of muscular training.
Absolutely. I don't believe you that I was only 20. You're a Pilates instructor, so it might have been like 47. And you're like, that was only 20.
We can't count, so.
That's why I put ish at the end. Anyone in the Pilates club, I just say, oh, we're doing 5-ish. And then I tell a story. And when the story is done, that's the 5th rep.
Exactly.
Okay. You got to listen to the stories.
You have that one person that counts in class. Occasionally you'll have that one person that's like, that was rep 15. I'm like, thank you for counting for me.
It's 3 more. Yeah. All right, keep going. How strong do you want to get? There you go. That's something. Let's put it on them. That'll piss them off. But so it's good to have little definitions and be able to split apart different aspects of fitness.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times, like a client doesn't, like in my experience, a client usually doesn't come in and they're like, I would like to increase my endurance, or things like that. They use more lay terms, and they mean something. Like a common thing someone says is, I want to come in and I want to get stronger. Okay, but that doesn't always mean I want to increase my 1 repetition maximum utilizing the Pilates method.
Yep.
Someone probably has, but I haven't met them.
Yeah.
When you hear a client say, I want to get stronger, what do you think they mean by that?
Again, it can be kind of a mixed bag. It really, this is the beauty of this topic, and with discussing it with me, is I can look at it from every angle to dissect, which is why I typically ask a lot of questions. Like if you train with me on private or anything like that, you have a full long questionnaire, so I really get specific, and then we have another conversation about all your questions. Most of the time, I would say it's someone literally either wants to get physically stronger. I taught a lot of elderly people at my studio because that was the population I was in. So they wanted to be able to, squat down all the way to the floor and get back up. They wanted something like that. Sometimes, again, depending on if it's a guy or not, a lot of times guys stronger, a lot of times also means I want to build muscle. And so, again, those I would say kind of are like the big things. Is I either want to perform something that I'm having trouble doing, some type of movement pattern, or I want to build muscle is usually the 2 biggest ones that I would say that means.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that stuck out with what you mentioned is that your preference to ask more questions. And to any listener out there, just like the mystery is, as you grow, you don't really have more answers. You have better questions
100%.
because science doesn't know the answers to a lot of this stuff. But we're always playing with probabilities, right? Just try to increase the probabilities, and you learn that by asking more questions. This is kind of like when someone comes in and they're like, I want stronger abs. And then it's like, well, why? Right? Like, oh, because you have back pain. You don't want back pain.
Yes.
Right? That's what it is.
Yeah. I'll always think of some follow-up questions.
Yeah. And so I think it's just good. Like any listener out there, when a client says, I want to get stronger, just like, what does stronger mean to you? Or let's say you got stronger. How has that made an impact in your life?
What does that look like for you in your future?
Yeah. Like I can tell you, my other half at home, that means I can lift the overhead luggage because I'm going traveling. Or, there's like the holes on the belt buckle. Like that's the metric. There's no like 1 rep max. Who gives a shit? Traveling. Everyone's a little different. And like you mentioned with an elderly population, which is a population dear to my heart, it is very much about, not always, right? Someone might want to be running a marathon. They're badass.
Yeah.
A lot of times go ahead.
I was going to say, absolutely. With that population, they can surprise you. It's not always, oh, I'm struggling. It's sometimes they're running circles around the 30-year-olds.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen a lot of really old 30-year-olds and a lot of young 70-year-olds, and vice versa. But a lot of times, like, just priorities change, right? And so it can be getting out of a chair. A lot of times it's like maintaining independence, and it could be like they don't even have any problems, but they heard their neighbor fell, right? And it scares the crap out of them. Whereas younger populations, a lot of times it might be more sport or something a little bit more active. But when we talk about building strength, as Pilates instructors, a lot of times we're taught Pilates, but not necessarily exercise science principles. And there can be so much added value to learning concepts and applying it to the exercises we know.
Yeah.
But like, what are your thoughts on like the typical, like brick and mortar standard Pilates class that's in the neighborhood and its ability to tick the boxes for strength gains?
So I discussed this before on a live, and I got a little heat for it, but that's all right. We're here to discuss it again. Your average Pilates class, if you're not doing anything, is absolutely a great thing to go do. And even if you are doing stuff, it can be a great thing to go do, but you should know why you're doing it in your training. You should every single person that is engaging in physical activity, which hopefully everyone is, should have training goals and like a training guide of what am I working on currently. And maybe that Pilates class is the only thing you're doing. It's your start. You're saying, hey, I haven't been doing anything for 3 weeks. Then by all means, go take that Pilates class. Maybe you are a hardcore lifter and you do bodybuilding, 6 days a week. And the Pilates class well enough to say, hey, this would be a good bit of kind of recovery kind of thing for me to do. Beautiful there. But I will say for people that go only to Pilates and do Pilates for strict goals, your average Pilates class is really only going to breed average results. I feel like most Pilates classes, as they're taught typically as a full body routine. They're not challenging our muscles well enough to actually truly be a good source for building muscle. They do, again, help with some flexibility, help with maybe a little bit of muscular endurance, but that's kind of it. So again, they can be good. There's nothing wrong with them, but you just need to know why you're going to a Pilates class.
I get to play devil's advocate. It's gonna be fun because I can put on whatever hat I want.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna put on the devil's advocate hat. So for the Pilates instructor who's like walking on the beach or in the woods right now, or maybe in the grocery store, and they're like, "But it's hard. Pilates is hard."
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on exercise being hard and exercise being strength building?
Again, endurance is hard. Endurance doesn't necessarily beget strength. Endurance builds more endurance. That's what it does. If we start looking at, again, one of my favorite that I always tell people to go look at is to use the old school term, the 7 granddaddy laws of training by Dr. Hatfield. He talks about the laws of specificity, and that if you train for something specific, if you're planning on going cycling for a long distance, you should go cycle long distances. If you're going to go try to build muscle, Pilates classes, as they are traditionally taught, are not going to tick that box. They will, again, depending on the stages. Like, I can play my own devil's advocate. If you're brand new and, again, not doing anything, it is going to build strength. If you've been a couch potato for the past 6 months, you're going to see strength gains. But it's going to be fast strength gains, and it's going to be short-lived because you're going to hit a plateau. After a certain point, again, another one of the granddaddy laws talks about needing to change up what we're doing to keep adding on more load, to keep challenging ourselves. And that's where Pilates classes a lot of times don't really tick that box, is they're not, after a certain point, continuing to challenge our muscles enough to have us grow.
Yeah, no, well said. And for the listener out there that is noticing heat and frustration in your mind and in your thoughts, this is exactly the conversation, or that's what growth feels like. That's what cognitive growth hurts.
Yes.
Right? Like learning hurts. And I encourage you to take what you like and leave what you don't.
Absolutely.
I haven't heard anything that says Pilates is not healthy, don't do it, or that Pilates doesn't help with XYZ. But we're talking specifically about strength, which is highly associated with hypertrophy, which is the muscle mass, but then strength is the amount of force you can generate.
Yeah.
Right. And that's technically with one repetition. But you can play around with that definition a little bit. And you mentioned the law of specificity a bit, and I think that's a really big one, because it's one of the things that I'm passionate about is just help, or as I've grown in my career, and I think this is really useful when you study movement outside of Pilates, is are we doing Pilates to get better at Pilates? Because a lot of times the argument is it's a system. Well, a system for what? To get better at the system. And then by default, you randomly get better at other things.
Yep.
If you want to be, but when you just look at it, when you study movement outside of Pilates, you just kind of see it as movement.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned something where if you want to go cycling, you should get better at cycling. So like, how would you put in your own words, the difference between doing Pilates to get better at the system of Pilates, and then doing Pilates to getting better at a meaningful non-Pilates activity?
Again, the best way is like you were just talking about, is to look at the movements in what it is that you're trying to build. If you're, trying to build on, let's say, a golf swing or something, doing a regular Pilates class where you're doing leg presses and all this, and you might do just a tiny bit of rotation, isn't going to really hit it. You're going to need to hit rotation a lot harder. And that's where I kind of started to break down. And here recently, I did a post on Instagram that, again, some people loved, some people didn't. Take it as you will. I look at Pilates in my own career as when I first started, I started teaching Pilates classes, which was, again, very true to the Pilates repertoire and the Pilates principles. Then after about 5 years, I started to get bored with it because I'm easily bored. And I wanted to mix in other things. So I started pulling different things from my background, yoga, strength training, all that kind of stuff. And I started teaching a more athletic style Pilates. And I had a Pilates for tennis players class and a Pilates for golfers class and stuff like that. And then really it's been in this past probably 2 years that I started really looking at even myself. And again, I can admit where I've said stuff in the past, and from, I would say, my own lack of knowledge and ignorance and a little bit of being too keyed in on the cult that is fitness. And I don't say that as Pilates is the only cult. Every branch of fitness, when I did a ton of yoga, I was in the yoga cult. They believed yoga fixed any and everything under the sun. When I have done and stuck with any one thing, they believe that what they all do is the end all be all. And I will tell everyone that is one thing you can essentially guarantee, is that no one system does it all. It's why I like mixing systems together. I love what Pilates has, and I love taking those principles and applying them with my background in physical training. And so now this past probably 2 years, I've truly looked at it as the reformer is just another piece of equipment. It's very similar in certain ways to a cable machine at a gym. How can I use some Pilates moves to actually give people that come to me, since that's what most people want, to build muscle, to lose fat? How can I do that? And that's what I've kind of done.
It sounds like you're teaching like informed movement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what a thing.
Yep.
I've certainly been, I can relate to a lot of what you are mentioning, and it's really refreshing. And I hope this conversation is refreshing for anyone out there who feels alone in their thinking. In that there is that thing of like, you learn Pilates and you learn a lot of rules. So you learn to color in the lines, and then there's an education in that. There's really a lot in that, but it's also, you shouldn't be limited to it.
Yep.
And then as you go from, place to place, you join cult to cult. And then you realize like, you don't have to be part of any cult. You can just like take a little bit from everything.
Yep.
And before you know it, you just start teaching movement. And it's like, is this Pilates? Like, I don't know, but Carol wants to get up the stairs, so I don't really care.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not intended to be disrespectful.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, I would rather be a client advocate than a cult advocate.
Exactly. And again, then it takes it from me teaching what I want in my ego to, again, servicing the person that's in here paying me money, giving them what they want in me. If they want to learn Pilates principles, I'll teach you Pilates principles all freaking day long. If you want to build muscle and lose weight using their former, then I'm going to go way more strength based. Doesn't mean I won't still throw in some Pilates principles in there for fun, and vice versa. If I'm teaching you strict Pilates, I might throw in some other stuff for fun, because I think everyone should try a little bit of everything. It's kind of like even just a regular Pilates class for anyone listening that, although I doubt anyone listening is only doing their first Pilates class, but if you've only ever done one and you didn't like it, you may just not like that teacher and their style. Go try another one, then try another one, then try another one. You'll find someone who teaches the way you like.
Absolutely. Right. And what I keep hearing from you is client-centered care instead of instructor-centered care.
Yeah.
And that means that you do what the client needs rather than what you've been taught, that you need to honor the system or something. But in regards to cults, I'm not anti-cult. I'm a part of the coffee cult. I am absolutely part of it. If you drink coffee, we're instantly friends.
Same.
Right? To some degree. We have to talk. There's more criteria, but you're in the right direction.
Yep.
You tea drinkers, that's fine. I'll have a cup with you. I had my coffee before.
Yep.
But yeah, the whole Pilates cult, that's the thing. But for instructors who are inspired by the conversation and the concept, but you just don't quite know like where to go with it, what are like some principles of strength training that you think are really valuable for Pilates instructors to be familiar with? I know you've touched on some, but
Yeah, absolutely. So here, I would say one that I've been seeing most recent, and I talked to you about before we were going to do this, is the overload principle. That one I feel like is a very big one, and again, that's one that I feel like is neglected truly in Pilates, although some may say it's not. But it really is, as far as making moves challenging. I would say for the overload principle, most people think, oh, I just need to go from a 3-pound weight to, or excuse me, a 3-pound weight to a 5-pound weight. Technically, yes, that is, you're loading your muscle more because you're adding 2 more pounds. But the principle is a little bit more strict when you look at it. It specifies that you should go up no more than 10% of whatever your current lifting is per week. And while, again, going from 3 pounds to 5 pounds is going to go technically over that, it's not truly, for most people, when they're already lifting 3 pounds, I'm just like, you lift a water bottle and it's 3 pounds. Let's talk about lifting your kid that's 50 pounds.
mm-hmm.
That's where we should start thinking at. We want to be using weight that is actually challenging. And again, at those end reps of a set, we may not finish the set. Like, that's where we're talking about. So again, we should be looking at, okay, so if we're utilizing, say, bicep curls on in Pilates, traditionally a lot of Pilates instructors will use one red or one full spring. Let's go up a half spring. Let's add that into that. And that's a pretty big challenge for that muscle group. So it's just a different way of looking at it versus, again, a lot of instructors I see are starting to use it, seeming like it's a new buzzword that I'm seeing in social media. And I feel like they don't truly understand it. It needs to be measured. And that's one thing I will say, and we can touch on more later, is that when I was teaching my studio, I had classes and I had clients that I worked on, and I progressed the classes. There was a true program behind it of this 3 weeks, we're working on this, we're working around in this range, then we're going to change it up and work into this range. Then, like, we were working on specific goals to continue to build them up more and more. It wasn't just a come in and, oh, whatever you're feeling today. It was like, no, we had structure behind it, I guess.
Absolutely. So there's where do we go with that? So progressive overload, I have heard it buzzed around as well. And I think that's the value of individuals like you in the industry to shed light in a different perspective. And I think it's really important to talk to people about strength training concepts who have education in strength training. And I think it's dicey, and I'm not putting people under the bus, but it's dicey when people who solely have a Pilates education educate others on what progressive overload is. It's kind of like someone who has a personal training background educating people on what Pilates is. There's a little bit of a stay in your lane. And it's a stay in your lane in terms of what you're educating on, but remain open into what you are receiving.
Mm-hmm.
And so, can you, so with progressive overload, you can go from the 3 pounds to the 5 pounds, right? But then what I think what's important to recognize is, like, what are you progressively overloading?
Mm-hmm.
And that needs to be the thing that fails. So I think the biceps example is really good, because a lot of times in bicep examples on the reformer, you're like facing the pulleys, sitting on something, right?
Yep.
And then you're in 90 degrees of shoulder flexion until your deltoids burn out from isometric contractions.
Yep.
So can you, before I go on my own monologue on that, can you shed light on that concept of, you're nodding your head like you know what I'm talking about. Arms are fully extended, the shoulder burns, super healthy, but not actually strength or hypertrophy for the biceps, which is the whole point of the progressive overload in my perspective.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
So again, a big thing with Pilates, and it's why it's hard to truly do things like progressive overload on reformer unless you have a good background in it, is the muscle we're working should always be the limiting factor. That's the muscle that should fail first. So perfect example, we were just talking about arms lifted. We're here doing our biceps. Your shoulder is going to get tired from holding your arms up way before we actually finish tiring out our biceps.
Mhm.
So that's where they talk about, and there's tons of talk about, oh, Pilates is really good for, stability and the stability muscles, and that's great. But when you're trying to hit hypertrophy, you essentially want to take stability out. You want to take that out for the muscle you're working. You want it to be in its most stable position, which most of the time means that it's very well propped up, so that, again, it can be the muscle that tires first. So for that bicep example, when I am truly training it for people that want bigger biceps, I do a preacher curl. I have them bend their knees in and prop their elbows on their knees, so they no longer have to worry about the stabilizers of their shoulder tiring out before their biceps.
Yeah, so you have like passive stability of the humerus, meaning
Yep.
something outside of the body is stabilizing it, or like I think a simple way, because audio is always really challenging, right?
Mhm.
Is keep the arm close to your body,
Mhm.
and you're on the right track, even though there's more to go with that. Um, but when we talk about, you made a good point of the relationship between basically like strength and control, where they have an inverse relationship. If you're on something unstable, you can't generate as much strength, and if you're trying
Mhm.
to progressively overload something, we should generate a lot of strength and then adapt to it. And a classic one that I share a lot with people and in my services at Evidence-Based Pilates is, powerlifters don't train on BOSU balls,
Nope.
right? They train on the floor,
Yep.
right? For a reason. And so there's something to be said with that, because a lot of times we make something harder
Mhm.
because we add a control challenge, right? Which is healthy. But if
Yep.
this is where it's important to understand strength so we can make more informed decisions. So if we say we're doing strength, we're making a strength decision. And when it comes to strength, I think a concept that's good to dive into, which again was not in our notes, so totally not fair. I'm throwing you under the bus, is
Right.
form, right? This is like trigger word. It's Pilates trigger words, right?
Yes.
So form, right? Because we want like Pilates is very aesthetically based, and like in a good amount of the industry. What are your thoughts in regards to the form of someone's movement when you're biasing strength and hypertrophy?
So, and kind of a hot take that a lot of people probably won't love to hear is, form to a point doesn't matter as much. Um, there was a study that I was reading about the other day that was talking about, again, the bicep curl specifically and trying to grow the bicep curl, and the cheat reps are a fantastic way to help get those bicep muscles under enough stress that they continue to grow past if you've hit a plateau. And for anyone listening, a cheat rep is essentially you're using a little bit of body swing and everything to help with that lift. So it is not ramrod straight, perfect spine, isolated only bicep movement. And that's where certain things like that kind of come in. I also feel like a lot of times we pay too much attention to form without truly understanding, again, biomechanics in the body. To take squats for a perfect example there, a lot of people in a cue, almost all of us have probably heard, is chest up during your squat. That's great. If you got short femurs or, proper hip sockets and all that, if you're super tall, my partner's 6'4", their squat is going to lean forward a lot more. And that's just literally because of their biomechanics of their body. They cannot physically be in that ramrod, or if they do, then instead we've gone into spinal extension. You'll notice the rib cage flares out instead of being in line with the pelvis during a squat. So form is something that, and I feel like this comes with a lot of experience of teaching, is watching people and saying, hey, is this a good enough form for them? If yes, leave them alone. Let them continue with the movement.
Yeah. Um, and within that, I think that's a great example of just the variability of somebody's innate anatomy and how that's going to look different, right? So someone 5'2", is going to look different in a squat than someone 6'4". I'm part of the Tall People Club, so I
Mm-hmm.
totally get that. Keeping me upright in a squat is saying I would like you to fall,
Yeah.
right? It's like, oh, thanks. And then also, like, a point to consider is how not only like from person to person may form look a little different, but also from repetition to repetition.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you manage that? Like, if you look at like a power lifter breaking a world record, you're going to see some significant dynamic knee valgus, definitely on the concentric phase of a squat, which for anyone listening, that means the knees go in and we like get high blood pressure looking at their alignment.
Yeah.
So, so it's like, we're like, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you, and another way of saying that is as we get fatigued, we start to have like different alignment because we need different movement strategies, but then we have to get fatigued in order to provide enough stimulus to the muscle fibers to get them stronger.
Mm-hmm.
How do you manage, the variation of alignment as the repetitions progress?
Again, it's something to just accept to a point that form breakdown is going to break down, and how I kind of look at it is, as long as it's not such a bad breakdown that the movement pattern is truly being destroyed. That's what I'm watching, is I'm really watching their movement pattern, because I want them to keep with as good a movement pattern, because the body learns it and keeps moving through it. It becomes very automatic for the body to know, oh, this is how I should be positioned to do, again, squat, to use it. Once that form starts to break down past a certain point, then it's okay, it's time to take a break, let the body relax for a minute, and then move forward. And to go back to something that we were talking about a little bit earlier, a lot of times that comes into programming for a class for me. So if I'm programming something where, again, to use legs, either a lunge or a squat or something where we're doing a lot, I will have them do enough reps that I feel like they've sufficiently challenged themselves, they've reached that threshold. And then I will move on to another exercise and kind of do like a superset essentially between the two of, hey, let's give this muscle group a moment to relax while we work something else for a little bit. We're still keeping the heart rate up, and then we will go back and we will hit it again. And this is something that, I will do with certain clients. A lot of people, just because of what they have as an idea of Pilates, they don't love it. But in traditional weight training in a gym, you essentially will do a set, then you'll take a break and just sit there. Then you'll go back and do a set, and you'll do that again. And again, if that's what someone wants from me, utilizing the reformer, that's what I give them. I will say, hey, we're going to do this up to failure for you, and then we're going to stop. We'll let you recover, and then we're going to go back to it again. You'll do your breathing reps essentially.
There you go. There's so many ways to win at Pilates, and I think it can be refreshing, as a listener, to realize if you want this, there's many ways to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's also important to consider is there are some movements where like we don't need to progressively load. Like I don't think we need to progressively load mermaid. Like I think we can just you know what I mean? Like can we just mermaid? Don't mess with my mermaid.
Yeah.
One red spring. I'm not changing it. And we also, alignment matters a little bit more when we're doing front splits, I would say, because now there's a fall risk. And then not only are you going to fall, but also the cost of falling.
Yeah.
So I imagine the lunges are probably like, in a controlled environment where the cost of falling or failing is pretty low. I think
Yeah.
there's like reasonable things to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of how I look at and how I teach my training and how I structured my studios. My level 1 classes were always very simple movements that again focused a lot on building strength. They weren't overcomplicated or anything like that. My level 2s is where again I started adding on more spring for more people for certain classes and focusing on that hypertrophy, focusing on building longer endurance periods and stuff like that. And again, taking notes, keeping the structure to watch what they're doing and make sure what we're doing is actually working. That's a big thing for any instructor, is take notes and say, hey, are they actually progressing like I want them to, or are they not? Do I need to go back to the drawing board and see what's going on? And then my level 3 class that a lot of people always want to go into, and my level 3 students, if they ever heard this still today, they would hate me because I always said it and it pissed them off. My level 3 was not physically the hardest class. That level 3 was the most complicated moves that required balance, precision, control. So again, it's using lots of stability and stuff, but physically, it's not necessarily as hard as far as going to building muscle as, say, my level 2 or my level 1 could be, because the movements were so complex.
So let's double click on that. Like why is a complicated movement not as physically demanding as a simple movement?
It really, to me, it comes down, biggest thing, to stability. A lot of our complicated movements, again, if we're going to practice, something like snake or a handstand or something like that, it's multiple areas of the body, multiple muscle groups working in unison to move the body in this specific way. Versus, again, if we take using a squat is essentially a very much an up and down pattern that truly should just be working, our legs, is that's the primary goal for our squat. Limiting factor for that could be our back or our core, depending on how heavy we've gone. But again, its focus is very simple. It's kind of like doing compound movements versus isolated movements. Compound movement requires more full body, more stability and everything. Isolated movement, theoretically, is just working one muscle.
There you go. Yeah, it's like simple doesn't mean easy. I used to have a class called Simple Reformer, and then people would show up, don't even need to turn on the fans or whatever. And I'm like, no, add every spring.
Yep.
Go out, come in, 20 later. And I think a good, like a parallel example, just another way of saying essentially what you mentioned is Russian splits. Sometimes they're called back splits on the reformer, right? So that's loaded knee extension, even though there's like 17 other things going on. I would say that you're going to get more out of single leg footwork in terms of quads. Like knee extensors are quads. Yep. So that's just like an example, but that doesn't mean single leg footwork is better. It's just, what decision are you making? Are you making a complicated, like a complexity decision, which is coordination, balance, etc., flexibility, like Russian splits, or strength, which is just straight up single leg footwork?
Yeah. And another way to kind of think of it, and how, again, that I love to program those classes, I kind of program those classes as a pinnacle class. We had a pinnacle move like the Russian splits that I was like, all right, this is what we're going to try and hit today. I'd give them a little bit of warm up to, again, make sure that the body is ready to practice that. Then I actually had them practice that move relatively early in the class, because I don't want them to be tired. I don't want them to be fatigued, to have movement breakdown before we get to the hardest move that we're going to do that day. Then I regressed it and said, all right, let's now, after we've done and practiced it, let's work on the muscles and strengthen those that we need to do that move better next time.
That's an evidence-informed decision. Absolutely. Like my understanding is, when you're doing something strength-based, you actually want to warm up, just like you mentioned, but you don't want to do it at the end because you're tired. Yeah. Whereas a lot of times it's like you build up in a Pilates session, and then like the hardest thing is at the end, which I'm totally guilty of in endurance and all of that. But when you're going straight for strength, that's not what you generally want to do.
Yeah.
On Instagram, which I mentioned prior to hitting record with you, I asked the audience what questions do you have for Reed, because I was excited to have you on, and they were all kind of around, which is typical questions of like, theories are great, knowledge is great, but like, what do I do? Sally's coming in at 9 a.m. tomorrow. what do I actually do? Right? These are very much application questions. So thank you to anyone who asked. The first one, even though we've touched on this a little bit, is like, can you provide like concrete examples of how you approach reformer programming? So for the instructor who wants to apply some of this, like, what do they actually do?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it depends on what the goal of the class is. If the goal of the class, and a lot of times I love to break my class down similar like we would in a gym, to areas of the body. I'm a partial fan of a upper lower split just because I've never really bought into the gym bro, one muscle group a day kind of thing. And that doesn't work for a lot of people. So if I am programming a class, let's say it's a lower body class, that's what I'm going to focus on. Is I'm going to focus on the low body. And then the next thing I'm going to focus on is all the different ways that the body moves. So our lower body moves. So we squat, we hip, we hinge, we lunge. Then we have our abduction and adduction. So really focusing on all those areas. You could even break it down more. Some days, like with the client I had earlier this week, we focused on a single plane. We focused on essentially our squats and lunges and all that. Then when we train tomorrow, we're going to focus more on adduction and abduction to break it up. So that's a great way to look at it. And if we're talking about upper body, kind of the same thing, is you can look at all the different ways that the upper body moves and all the different muscles of the upper body. You're going to want to hit onto your bigger lifts traditionally first. So working things like our push-ups, pull-ups, things like that. Then we can go into those isolated movements of like a bicep curl, a tricep press, things like that. And again, another way to look at it is we essentially have horizontal push-pull, then we have vertical push-pull. So in one training session, if I'm training a client twice a week, I may do vertical push and vertical pull. And then the next day we'll do horizontal push and horizontal pull exercises. So that's a great way to kind of program a class for specific clients. If you're going to do full body classes, then again, you can still even do the same for a full body and focus on, again, say a squat pattern for your legs. Again, maybe traditional ab work, supine ab work, and horizontal push pull. And then for the next class, you do more abduction, adduction. We work more into our obliques or side planks, and then we work more vertical push pull kind of thing. So
I love the framework. There you go. There's your Pilates course right there. But I'm just kind of chuckling on the side because I'm currently in the Anatomy and Biomechanics Club. We're going through upper extremity right now. And I've been selling them on push pull, horizontal, vertical. And then at first it's like deer in headlights. Like, not everyone, but like, it's like, what do you mean? Yeah. And then we zoom out and we look at all the muscles, and we just went over glenohumeral osteoarthritis and shoulder replacements. And then we zoomed out and we're like, look at what they're doing. They're pushing, pulling, and then maybe some rotation. So I love that that framework, and I also appreciate how you advocate for the possibility of split body routines having a role in a Pilates class, because sometimes we have this framework of, oh, we don't do only half the body, we do the full body, and it's like total smoke and mirrors. It's like, no, you're just underloading the whole body instead of like adequately loading part of the body. So there is value in doing a split body routine. I absolutely have similar things in my services of like leg focus class, arm focus class.
Yeah. And to kind of like touch on that again, going back to like an upper body day versus a lower body day versus a full body. And this is why, again, I don't think an average Pilates class in an average Pilates studio is going to do a lot for you. Most average Pilates classes in Pilates studios, you're going to do any exercise maybe one time, and then you're going to move on to the next exercise, and you're never going to do that exercise again. When I'm splitting upper body, lower body, we're doing 4 sets of squats for depending on how heavy we're working. If we're working more endurance, we'll go more 15 plus reps. If we're really working on more strength or hypertrophy, we may only hit 8 reps at a heavier strength. But again, we're pushing closer to failure for multiple sets. We are really burning up whatever it is that we're working on.
Yeah, and like the boundary of that, this kind of leads into the next question. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Is there's this boundary between like, yes, that's like scientifically accurate. We need to increase exercise volume with the adequate intensity. However, once you do it the third time, it's kind of like now we're bored, right? Or our class is bored, or we have it, or it could be imagined boredom. We're just
Mm.
afraid that class is boring now, but your clients are actually like dying and loving it. They're going to leave you a good Google review.
Yep.
Um, how do you balance between applying this stuff, but then also keeping people entertained so they're having a good human experience in your class?
Um, there's multiple ways that I do it. Again, today, in a class that I taught this morning at 6, I was having them focus on 2 different movements. So again, it's not we're doing a set of squats, then we're doing another set of squats, and we're doing another set. Instead, I was having them do lunges on the carriage, and then we stopped and we practiced. For one set, we would do tendon stretch, and the next set, we would do control facing front. I believe that's what's called in traditional Pilates terms. Um, but that's you kind of mix up the exercises. You can add like supersets of adding an exercise or two together to give them a little bit of variety in there. There's also different things you can do. Something else I did today, it's something that I did at my old studio that I find very beneficial, especially as people move forward, is I feel like we don't really work a lot of hand-eye coordination. So today I brought tennis balls to class. In the last 5 minutes of class, I gave everyone a tennis ball. We practiced different catching patterns, bouncing patterns, stuff like that. And at the end, I had them essentially in a circus juggling with each other. Like it's little things like that can go a long way to bringing a little bit of levity to what can be very boring. It's why a lot of times I think people like a traditional Pilates class is because they're moving along. They're not focused on doing the same muscle group over and over again because that is boring. It is hard and it is good for you, but it is boring.
So you just throw stuff at your students.
Just throw. They threw stuff at me. So I've had a ring or two come past my head on that 4th squat.
Oh
So
yeah. Oh yeah, the best is when someone's squeezing the magic circle. If that's, I don't know, that's what we're talking about, and then it comes at your face. If you've
yep.
been teaching long enough, you've had it. If you
Mm-hmm.
haven't, when it does happen, please message me because I
Yes.
told you so. But yeah, there's just this entertainment factor of Pilates, and you or any exercise, and you really highlighted it that Pilates a lot of times we don't do something more than once, and it feels good and it's cognitively engaging, right? And so it becomes this hobby. But there's a trade off to that is that you don't get the volume
Yep.
that you need to get stronger. So I love that you're adding that repetition. And one thing I would add to that is that also like your personality and your engagement with your clients in an authentic way is part of the service and part of why they're coming back. And
Yep.
so you are also, you're not an, I don't want to say you're like a comedy routine or anything or whatnot, but like your words and your
Yep.
communication can also be engaging
Yes.
with them.
Absolutely. That's anyone that has ever come to my studio, at least my studio. Here are the clients because it's only my 2nd week of teaching public group classes again. They're learning what they're getting into with me. My clients back home, because I lived in a place where we were at a beach, so we have people come for vacations all the time, and they'd be like, "Your studio is very different than our studios back home. They're always very quiet." No one. I was like, I despise a quiet class. If y'all don't talk to me, I'm going to make this hard so that you at least moan and groan because I don't want it dead silent here. So yeah, that's your personality will start to shine through, and that's what really keeps people coming back is a
Same.
good experience, a good community experience. I will say another way, as you're just talking now, was something that I was reminded of for another way to again make doing something of repetition over and over slightly more bearable. I just finished creating this big Pilates reformer bundle for Reformer One and Reform. I love teaching beginners. It's one of my most favorite things. They are my bread and butter. And I really only teach about 45 exercises, not necessarily all at the same class, but I really only have about 45 exercises that I like to teach to beginners. But I have hundreds of variations, and it could be the most minute thing of, let's say, we're taking a single leg press with your knee at tabletop. Maybe it's simply adding dorsiflexion and plantar flexion to that lifted foot. We do one round, keeping it just active. The next round, we're having them move it. Little things like that can really help. Another one that I learned from another Pilates instructor that I really loved for, again, a cognition kind of thing, was when I would have them do supine ab work and their fingers are, through the straps. I would tell them, I'm going to call out a number between 1 and 5. And every time you raise your hand up, I want you to make that number on both hands. And they would do that. And then I would say, okay, now we're going to take it up a challenge. I'm going to call out 2 numbers. First number is left hand, second number is right hand. So they're still working and getting the work, but we're just adding in a little something just to make it where it's not as boring.
That's awesome. There's so many ways to entertain people. I would entertain people by saying 12 and then just seeing just to see what they do.
Yeah.
Like, get that. But no, I think it's helpful. It's a synergistic experience where we also want to like not be bored as well.
Yes.
I once quit a studio because I was bored with the students. Sorry. They were so stale. They didn't like any of my jokes and no one understood, no one knew the lyrics to Beyonce. I was like, this is way too stiff for me.
Yeah.
I had to go. And the
I-
owner was weird. They were hair drying their hair during my class, like full on hair dry. Anyways, I had to go. Super weird. But I won't. No more gossip.
Yeah.
You mentioned, okay, as we start to wrap up, you mentioned that you have a new product out there for Pilates instructors, and just for anyone listening, you can get all of Reed's information as well as his offerings with the links in the show notes. But could you tell the audience a little bit more about what you have to offer for them to help them become more skilled, knowledgeable, and
Yeah.
confident?
So this is a Reformer one bundle, or my beginner Reformer bundle. And essentially what it is it is a combination of 10 pre-written classes, all perfect for level ones. Each individual class has a specific focus to it. So again, like there's one class that's supine abs. So we're teaching supine abs to the clients in that class. Another class is focused on bridging. So again, for our leg work, we're focused on bridging there. And essentially, the way after 10 years of teaching for beginners, I find a lot of times if they come into a brand new class every time, it's very overwhelming. So I want to just focus essentially on one block of exercises and ramping those up while keeping all the rest of the exercises the same as that they did in the class before. And again, a lot of people will think, oh, well, that'll be boring for them. If they're truly a beginner, it's not going to be that boring for them. And even my advanced students, because they knew what they were getting, if they were, again, on a day where they said, this needs to be an active recovery day, they could come back and take that class as a good active recovery day. Mm-hmm. So it's 10 reformer classes that I have written out for you. Each class has a demonstration video of every exercise listed in the class. There's a link to a private video on YouTube that you can view all that on. It also includes a exercise library. So again, it's essentially I believe it was 45 exercises, but by the time I finished writing out all the variations, it's about 250 variations of those exercises and that are listed. And again, that has its own demo video where you can go to and you can see each and every exercise and variation on that. And it's just, I believe, a great thing for people who are just doing Pilates on their own. You're capable of doing any of these classes on their own. They're not super advanced, or super complicated exercises. So you can do those. For beginning instructors, it's a great way to get your feet wet. We didn't mention this earlier, but when I taught at that resort, again, I was doing a training while I was teaching. I essentially started teaching right as I started training. I taught the same 3 classes to those clients for 2 years. And that's where I started developing the little variations, because my training was very sporadic. So it took a while to go through. So I taught the same ones and those clients loved it. And they are solid. Those classes were solid classes. And those classes are in this bundle as well. So it's great for, again, beginner instructors that are doing that, or again, just people that, are saying, hey, I want to see what he teaches. I enjoy what he does online. I want to see his style and philosophy of teaching a little bit more.
Yeah, and the links to all of that is in the show notes. And I think that one thing that really hit home is that I don't think repetition is boring. I think easy is boring. And so I love that you're doing this in which, with beginner classes or level 1 classes, there's a simplicity aspect to it, and it can be really hard to program those as instructors. So if any instructor struggles with that, I highly recommend link in the show notes, and also follow Reed on Instagram. But last question here: if a listener took one thing, like just one thing from this episode, what would you like it to be?
What I would like it to be, and if I could go back and talk to me about 8 years ago, once you feel like you have a true good grasp on the Pilates method, principles, all of that, it is absolutely okay to color outside the box and to make it your own. That is how you will build a following that will love you. That is how you will build clients that will always come back to you. Again, they are there for the exercise, but they're also there for you. Your unique experience is purely your own. No one person is going to have the same experience and be able to teach from that same experience. So don't be afraid to, once you have that good grasp, step outside and bring your personality to it.
Cheers to that. I have nothing to add. I just say, do that. Do that. Thank you so much, Reed, for being on the Evidence-Based Pilates podcast. You added a ton of value, and thank you to the listener who stuck in there. Go check out Reed's stuff, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you, guys.